Thank you all for coming back so promptly after your workshops. I hope your workshops were stimulating and interesting. Ours certainly was. This is us into our final session of the day, and certainly from my perspective, today has been a fantastic opportunity to discuss the minimum income guarantee, to raise a whole range of issues about how it might work, how it will look in practice, and how we get there. And we're going to try and tie all of this together now in this final session and really think about where do we go next with this, but bring it all together and think where do we go next. And I'm really pleased to say that to lead us into this final session, we have Russell Gunson, who you can see from the screen is the Head of Programmes and Practice at the Robertson Trust. But for our purposes, I think most importantly, he's co-chair of the Minimum Income Guarantee Expert Group, which you've been chairing now for the last 2 years, or feels like 2 years anyway. And really, as I said at the start of the day, we started with one of the co-chairs and we appropriately finished the day with one of the co-chairs. But Russell really has been steering the work of the expert group for the last couple of years and getting us to really this stage that we're at today, where we're having a big public debate about what the minimum income guarantee might look like. So really looking forward to hearing Russell's reflections on the day so far and where we go next. So over to you, Russell. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, everybody. I cannot emphasize enough how amazing it is to have, 200 people in a room all day thinking through not just why a minimum income guarantee might be a good idea, but how we can make it happen. And I think that's the theme of my presentation today. Massive thank you to the Poverty Alliance, to Ruth, to Peter in particular, for making it happen today. And as Peter alluded to, this is perfect timing for where the work is with the expert group, which I'll come on to in a second. What I want to talk through is a little bit of bringing together what we've talked about today. I also want to talk through where we are, not just in the process, but as a country today, and then do a bit of looking ahead in terms of where the minimum income guarantee could come in. I don't think it goes, or I don't think it should go without saying that we are in the middle of an economic emergency that we're simply just getting used to. We've never experienced anything like the last 10 years in terms of living standards, or at least not in modern times. And the projections we saw earlier this week sees this continue for at least another 5 years or so. It's the longest period of stagnating living standards for 250 years. Napoleon the film is out, and it's back to those times before we've seen anything like we've seen since the financial crash. And the UK has faced a series of crises, so the financial crash of 07-08, austerity through the 10s, welfare reform as it was euphemistically called, benefits cuts by any other name, particularly since 2015, and then of course COVID-19 and the cost of living emergency. We didn't just get to where we are today by choices, by luck. We got there by design. It's not all been bad over that period. You've heard we were in the Fair Work session just before this. There have been good things. So job quantity is up. Employment rate is up for many, not for all. The minimum wage is up, albeit not yet up to the real living wage. But over that similar period, we've seen job quality drop. We've seen real wages barely recover, and in actual fact, in the last year, with the cost of living emergency plummet, in fact. And the safety net, or the social contract, has become frayed with massive gaping holes in it. And overall, that's seen a redistribution of risk to those least able to bear it. And that's what our society looks like today. And a big part of it, not the only part of it, has been the universal credit reforms. So they were proposed in 2009, merging a number of old benefits into one, introduced gradually from 2013 and delayed and delayed and delayed. But what you did see, and Polly and the Trussell Trust more broadly, who you heard from this morning, would be able to tell you very closely about that, as would many in the room. You saw as universal credit rolled out, massive increases in food bank use, massive increases in destitution. And as was said in a different way earlier, it's because the universal credit system, in many ways, is a social insecurity system, not a social security system. And that's because it has crucial defects. It has a 5-week wait. It has monthly assessment and reassessment periods. So if you're paid every 2 weeks, there's some months you get much more, some months you get very little through the universal credit system. It becomes impossible to plan your finances. There's limits, there's caps, there's been freezes, there's bedroom taxes, there's conditions and sanctions, there's benefit deductions up to a quarter of an incredibly low level of payment. And that builds destitution in, by design, deliberately, in many ways, under the false pretext of pushing people out into work. And so what we see here is a system based on stigma and on punishment instead of support and participation. It strips people of dignity, respect, it strips them of fairness, and it disempowers people and leads to insecurity. And overall, that's bad. It's bad from a traditional right-wing perspective. It's bad for the economy. It's bad for people's health. It's bad for productivity. But for many of us in the room, it's bad in principle. It leads to an unfair and unjust society. And then if you look to the future, not only is this where we've come from, not only is this where we are now, but we're really ill-equipped with the systems that we have to look to the future and feel future-proofed. So a system that is ready for demographic change, as really kicks in over these next 20, 30 years, will be one that valued all forms of work, not just paid forms of work, so caring, childcare, other forms of contribution. A system ready for big, huge economic or technological change around automation or artificial intelligence. Elon Musk, I think he's got many things wrong, but maybe in terms of the economic shocks that we're facing, there are a few things to listen to. Pandemics, and even normal economic shocks. Economies boom and they bust, they grow and they contract, and our system is not set up to cope with that. But what if it didn't need to be this way? What if we could simply set a minimum level of income beneath which nobody was allowed to fall? You can implement that, as you've heard today, through work, through reducing essential costs, and through changes to social security. And in doing so, you could transform poverty rates and levels of financial insecurity in Scotland. You could place financial security at the heart as a foundation for a well-being economy. And that's what, at its heart, a minimum income guarantee is about. It's a universal guarantee to a minimum income level, yours by right. Universal in the way that the NHS is universal. You know it's there for you if you need it, but you know you don't use it every day just because it's there. A MIG level that would vary by your individual or your household needs, not flat, because we know treating everybody the same is not treating everybody fairly. Reform to work, reducing the costs of essentials, whether those be travel, whether those be energy, whether those be rent, whether those be food, whether increasingly those be digital and technology. And all this backed up by a targeted payment for those that don't reach that level of income through work. So it's not a UBI, it's not a universal basic income, albeit some people support a MIG as a first step towards that. And it's very much not the universal credit system. It's a right to a minimum level of income, something that no other country on the planet currently has. And so what could that look like? So you've heard about these things called the minimum income standards. There are academics at Loughborough that speak to the general public and ask them what the general public thinks is necessary to a minimum quality of life. And for 2023, that would place you at £17,000 per year for a first adult, £8,000 per child, and £11,000 per further adult. Now, I put these out there just to be illustrative. The expert group, as I'll get to in a second, hasn't got to setting the level yet. But set at these levels, even set at a percentage of these levels, you can see that this would be massively different, transformational to the current system and far above the very low rates that you see here. In addition, there would be a payment for rent, a payment for disability. We heard very strongly from the disability organisations represented on the group and those that we've spoken to beyond, that trying to bring disability that's assessed in a very different way and often individually, not often non-means tested, into this system might not work. But they need to speak to each other, and certainly those additional payments for disability need to cover the additional costs of disability. And at these levels, we would end poverty in Scotland. Simple as that, right? The cost would be high, but far, far less than a universal payment that goes to everyone all the time, whether they need it or not. And of course, these costs would be lowered the more people we put into fair work, and equally would be lowered the more that we can reduce the essential costs for everyone. So this would guarantee a right to a decent quality of life for everybody. And so where does this come from? It comes from a bit of work that I did in a previous role with a big team of other people in 2018. So it's a homegrown idea, if you like, something that we've created in Scotland, we being a much bigger group than even that group of people. It was a response to the last 15 years. It was a response to where we were back then in 2018, but also looking ahead to some of the things that we could face and that indeed we have faced since. And in the lead up to 2021 Holyrood election, a group of people, coalition group, managed to persuade the politicians to put this into their manifesto and to sign up. And so we have cross-party support for the expert group from all five, albeit there is a mini sixth party now, but from all five parties at the time that were represented in the Scottish Parliament. The expert group sees around 15 people from across Scotland, across loads of different organisations, loads of diversity in terms of background too. And that's accompanied by side with an experts by experience panel, bringing those with lived experience of financial security together. And we've reached to the point of Easter this year of an interim report, a final or full report by this time next year. And so we find so far that a MIG consists of three areas: work, costs, and a MIG payment. We set out foundational principles that give you brings into focus what a MIG could look like. And in particular, the approach we would need to take for this to succeed. So it needs to be co-designed, it needs to be supported by a broad coalition, it needs to be implementable, which I think is a really important point, which is part of this session too. And we set out in that interim report key findings. I'm not going to talk through all of these, there's 10 of them, but the first one and the last one I will highlight. So the first one is a MIG doesn't need to wait, and I'll get to that in a second. We've taken 13, 14 years to break the social security system in the UK. It will take time to rebuild it, but we can make those first steps very quickly, very soon, through existing powers, without further powers, without more money than in the budget. And then the last one is that really at the core of this, to build a guarantee, you have to get rid of some of the most pernicious parts of the existing system. You can't have a guarantee if there are conditions and sanctions, if there are 2-child limits, if there are caps, if there are 5-week waits, so on and so forth. And so where could we start? What is the answer to how? Now, at this point, I am stepping a little beyond where the expert group is, but absolutely today's discussion can feed in to where the expert group goes. But certainly the questions in our heads are around pilots and initial rollouts. So where could we begin? Where could we roll out a full minimum income guarantee in a way that is doable within existing powers and budgets, and in a way that can test the impacts? You see in Wales, there's a care experienced UBI. Care experienced people could be a place to start. Carers, as Fiona in the last session was talking through, could be a place to start. You could think of other places to start too. But what you need is a defined group, defined population, a combination of in work and out of work, where we can begin this. And that can happen as quickly as the money is available and as quickly as the route to delivery is available. Beyond that, on day one, it would be about building the guarantee. So switching off those incredibly pernicious defects within the existing system, those caps, limits, weights, etc. moving to a guarantee, albeit a guarantee at existing levels of payment. But I think we would all know from any work, whenever you've been out speaking to people with experience of poverty, whether now or in the past, but the insecurity and the volatility of the existing system is some of the most pernicious parts of it. Beyond that, it would be moving towards something similar to where Polly and Chris talked you through in the morning about the Essentials Guarantee. So your first few years, you can begin to build on that guarantee, the minimum income. Now, you couldn't get to those levels I talked you through earlier on day one, but you could get there over time. And you could do most of this through existing powers. There are needs for some additional flexibility, but not beyond the realms of possibility at all. A full MIG, getting to that full level I touched on earlier, that would need additional powers, to some extent over social security, but to a large extent over tax, borrowing and employment rights too. But you can see here that we can make really quick steps, even in the rest of this parliamentary term, to bring this to life for at least some people in some places in Scotland. And very soon after that, we can begin to put the foundation blocks in place very quickly, mainly through existing powers. This time last year, at this conference, I remember, and it will live with me for a long time, the conference was so good that that will live with me for a long time. But this particular comment, it was almost that people had lost a bit of hope that we could make a change. And this wasn't consistent, but I did a session last year on minimum income guarantee, and one of the big bits of feedback was, not only have my clients that I am trying to help lost hope that we can have a better future, but the people helping them had lost hope that they could deliver a better future with them. And I think that is one of the biggest hows underneath this session. If we lose hope that we can make a difference, then we can guarantee that we will not make that difference. So we have to keep that hope. What about the money was a good question from last year. Well, what about the money? It's absolutely true to say that things are incredibly tight for a lot of the reasons I've just talked through. But a UK government just found £20 billion of tax cuts 2 days ago, and the Scottish government found £100 million of a council tax freeze just a few weeks ago. If you can find money for those things, you can find money for these. And would people vote for this? They do, and they have. The Scottish Child Payment is £500 million of extra spend each year that's been tested, that's popular, that has not led to the government falling or being chucked out of power. And far from it, the attitudes in Scotland and across the UK suggest that people want to see more investment in these types of things. It's too big a change. Yes, it is a big change ultimately, but you can hear we can break this down step by step and make really good first steps that are affordable and transformational, the perfect combination if you're a politician with no money. It's too complicated. Well, that depends how you design it. If you break this down to a flat, you've heard it isn't a flat system, it'll be wrong in terms of meeting people's needs. If you break it down to every single individual need, you might have the perfect system, but you won't be able to implement it. People won't understand it or apply for it or take it up. So some of the balance for the expert group is getting that balance between simplicity and complexity right. And then the last one, this is the one that will stay with me. It was a sort of, it'll never happen. What's the point? It'll never happen. For me, that's up to us. That's up to us in this room. Things don't just happen, good things or bad things. They happen because people fight for them. And the minimum income guarantee could seriously transform poverty and financial security in Scotland. And so if that isn't worth fighting for, I don't know what is. So I'll leave it there, but that is where I wanted to leave us, which is we have to retain hope. Change doesn't just happen, it happens if you fight for it. So let's take today and fight for the change that we need to see, not just over the next couple of years, but beyond that too. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Russell. I kind of feel almost with that final contribution, we should just all leave the room now and go and do what Russell had asked us to do. But we're not going to do that. There's another little bit of work to go before you get to go home. But before we get you sitting on your tables and discussing what next, other questions for Russell? Russell set out a lot of what we need to happen to make the minimum income guarantee possible. But let's take 10 minutes or so before we go to our tables just to have any final questions here in the plenary. There's a question over here right at the start. Ralph, down there, thanks. And again, if I could just ask you to say who you are, that would be great.
Hi. I'm sorry, when you were talking, there was one bit, and you were saying about how the Scottish Government did the council tax stop and the UK Government lowered taxes. Right, the very first thing that came into my head was, oh God, he's going for austerity again. Promise me you're not going to do that or ask for that. I still think Scotland is trying to recover from it. And I mean, I know it came from America. I don't know why it came from America to us, but it didn't work. And after effects are still here.
Thank you. I'll let Russell come back in a minute, but are there any other questions for Russell on some of the... sorry, yeah.
Hi, so I attended my name's Erica from Citizens Advice Scotland, Policy Officer. So I attended the IFS analysis of the budget yesterday, and you could, I mean, literally in very stark graphic terms, you could see the one-for-one swap of tax cuts and public service investment. So my question is, given that the IFS's analysis indicates that we're on a trajectory towards austerity that's actually worse than the Osborne years, how do we ensure that the MIG works in partnership with calls and asks around public service investment? Because without real, genuine public collective services and investment in the public realm, the MIG can only go so far. And I think we'll all recognise that. The other thing I wanted to highlight is very much in favour of using care leavers as the primary ask around the pilots, simply because there's a very strong preventative aspect to that, and also because of the promise as well. I think that the narrative around that is wonderful on so many levels. But I think that's a group in which the public debt issue maybe doesn't come in quite so much to play, but with a lot of other groups, they will be starting the MIG process with huge amounts of public debt, usually council tax. How do we get around that issue? We don't want to risk the MIG effectively going towards repaying public debt. And obviously there's a lot of reform needed there to avoid that. I know that's a complex question, but that's the kind of things that I'm thinking about here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, just to take the last one first. So on debt to public bodies or arrears to public bodies, I think Martin from Aberlar's in this room and others that have been working on that alongside us at the Robertson Trust as well. There's massive amounts in there in the sense that public bodies often are giving with one hand and taking with the other, and equally chasing down time. There was a case study of £10 worth of school meal debt being run through the courts. Now, can you imagine the cost in doing so, both to the households and to the council? But never mind that, the indirect cost if that family tips over into education, social work, housing, etc. services. So there's a whole bunch in there. But for MIG, I think one of the key things is getting rid of the ability to take 25% of your payment through deductions. So currently universal credit, you heard earlier, £85 a week. But it's not for many, a high percentage of people, because third-party deductions reduce it by up to a quarter. So there is no guarantee if the guarantee is you can have this money, but we can also take a percentage away from it. So that's the first thing. On austerity, both. So just to be very clear, not pro-austerity at all, anti-austerity. And I think you can see from the last 10, 13 years that it's not just a heart or principled point. It has led to exactly where we are today in terms of low productivity, low tax revenue, and exactly those IFS projections that you were just talking about. So austerity is bad from a cold-hearted, right-wing perspective, excuse me. I feel comfortable in this room speaking like that. But it's also wrong in principle, wrong in justice terms. So looking ahead, do we have the money for this? Firstly, I think it's really unlikely, maybe this is naive, but I think it's really unlikely that any government, even a Conservative government, will come in and stick to the spending plans that they've outlined. I don't think it's possible to do IFS, OBR, and others say likewise. But if it's a different colour of government down south, there are tax levers you can pull that maybe we can come on to in the Q&A that would find the money. There is the money out there to do a good chunk of this quite quickly.
Thanks, Russell. More questions? So I'll go to Stephen here, and then the woman at the next table, and then Danielle. So into the middle first. So if you keep your questions reasonably tight, that'd be great. I'd love the great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stephen Sinclair, the interim chair of the Poverty and Equality Commission. Can you tell me what cooperation do you need from the DWP and the UK government to make this practical?
We'll take the next question as well. Take these three together.
Hi, I'm Helena van der Ploeg from the Grassmarket Community Project. Actually, following on from your last comment, general election will be soon. What is the commitment cross-party to make? So can we rely on a commitment from whoever is in power to take this forward?
And Danielle, just here. Thanks, Ralph.
Thank you, Danielle from Broke Not Broken in Kinross. We're an anti-poverty charity. My question is actually about where you're sort of piloting it. I know that you've come up with some really good suggestions already, and probably that's where you'll go down. But a focus that I would really like to bring to attention is those people that are on the cliff edge at the moment. And actually that's where the minimum income guarantee could prevent anybody else from falling into poverty. I know we need to watch how deep poverty is, but this might be a good pilot scheme for those who just are not quite eligible for the benefits at the moment. And I think that would be really interesting to see what the difference to those families and individuals as well, what the difference to them is, and would like that to be in consideration.
Thank you. Yeah, in terms of that last question, so the pilots are to be discussed and to be decided. Obviously, the expert group will put forward some options, but it will be up to the Scottish Government to then take them forward. Carers are being talked about, care leavers, care experienced young people being talked about, but by all means, there are others, and it's the right time to be putting those population groups in. So you could do a lottery of low-income folk in receipt of Scottish Child Payment or UC. You could look beyond that, as you suggested. So I think on that one, thinking caps after today, please get in touch with ideas for that, and we're really, really open to listening. On the other two questions, so can you trust a pledge from a politician? And that's sort of underneath your question there. I don't think pledges from politicians in and of themselves are strong. I think it's when you hold them to them and they have no option but to keep to those pledges that they retain that strength. So in Scotland, we've got 5 of the 5 and a bit parties represented in the Scottish Parliament. I would say there's 2 or 3 of those that are more strongly in their heart supportive of this than maybe the others. At the UK, I think this is much less on the agenda, if I'm absolutely honest. And so there's a route potentially through the Scottish parties in order to try and change that. And in a way, it links to Stephen's question about the interaction between UK institutions and Scotland. So it depends how you deliver it. I think in the first few steps, you can build on the back end of the existing system. So looking at switching off the really incredibly, as I say, pernicious parts of the universal credit system doesn't necessarily need you to build your own IT system and your own application system, etc., etc. Likewise, moving to put floors underneath existing payments might not need you to do that. I think once you get to the full version, you would likely need your own system. So the interaction between now and then will need some negotiation, but not massively, particularly around conditions and sanctions. That's where I think you would struggle under existing powers with existing relationships to make a big change. Around 2-child limits and around other things, you can use devolved powers,
you can use primary legislation in Scotland to drive those things in a way that wouldn't see them clawed back by HMRC or DWP. Sorry, that was a bit technical, but the short of it is you can do a lot without needing that interaction between DWP.
Thanks, Russell. I think we're going to pause the questions there, and we've got a final task for you to do. And that's, you can see it up on the screen behind me now. What we want you to do at your tables is really reflect on everything that you've heard so far today. So what's been useful, what particularly excites you about the minimum income guarantee, what are the challenges, what are your concerns, and what can you do about those challenges? Now, some of us are working in organisations, we're part of networks. What is it that you can do to help progress the minimum income guarantee? That might be even just to progress the discussion and the debate about it, because we don't expect everyone here to be 100% signed up to a policy that you might need to take back to your organisation, have a discussion about, but that's a thing that you can do. So what we want you to do for the next 20 minutes at your tables, I think there might be some proposed ideas for actions that could be taken sitting at your tables. I want you to discuss in groups about those questions, capture some of the thoughts, but particularly what is it that you can do to progress the minimum income guarantee in your own work, in your organisation. And then we'll come back in about 15 minutes just to get a little bit of feedback from you, and then we'll be closed. And remember, you do have your pledge cards, I think, in your bags. I'm assuming that's where they are. And so we want you to fill those out as well. We don't want this to be, as I said right at the start of the day, this isn't about an interesting discussion about a theoretical policy. This is about what we can do to actually move this forward. So the pledge cards are for you to fill in, and then we'll get back in touch with you in an unspecified amount of time. 6 months? Let's say 6 months. That's enough for time for something to happen. And see where we're all at, and to actually build a bit of momentum behind this idea for a minimum income guarantee. So turn to your colleagues and have a discussion around those 4 questions there, and we'll come back to you in about 15 minutes. What I want to do now is just get some immediate reflections from the discussions that took place. Any interesting, innovative, or fantastic ideas about how we can progress the minimum income guarantee? Which table would like to go first? Because we won't get round all of them, there's far too many tables. Someone put their hand in the air and we'll get a microphone to you. You've all suddenly gone quiet now, haven't you? You weren't quiet just a minute ago. Okay. Thank you, Isla. You're right at the back. There we go. There's a microphone. And I should have said, Isla, was there an online group? There was, and you're going to give us feedback from that. That's great.
Hello. Yes.
Thank you.
Well, we had great discussions at the table and some comments from online as well. I'll try and summarise very quickly. We spoke at our table about linking with human rights, the human rights bill that's coming up as a really good opportunity ahead of the ahead of the election period as well, getting MIG into manifestos, and linking with things like potentially like universal broadband, and thinking around how we can build understanding of those things really as for the public good in general, and the impact it has on improving health and access to education and all the wider benefits of those things. And we had one comment from the online attendees. It was Kim from Dumfries and Galloway Voice. Said, we've heard a lot throughout the day of how different factors can make people face higher levels of poverty, e.g. if you're living in a rural area, disabled people, carers, etc. How can intersectionality be considered when it comes to a MIG and minimum income standard to ensure people who face multiple additional barriers and challenges also get appropriate income levels? So thanks to Kim for that.
Thanks very much, Isla. Who would like to give us another bit of feedback? Emma.
So we were just looking at Philip making lots of progress from the session that he did last year at Russell, and feeling like there's more people who know more, and that's a really positive place to be on. We were just talking about how excited that we actually developed something like this will make a very real difference
to real people and actually help us to move towards the space of not just existing but flourishing and for individuals and communities. But I think for a bit of a challenge we were talking about is that some of the language around all of this is still quite tricky to understand. We've got lots of confusing terms that all kind of sound slightly the same, but they're not and they're different. And if we work in the sector and we don't get it, then what's that going to mean out there for the wider society, really? And we need some sticky, accessible language to help us to talk about this, kind of like through framing and analogy. And we were sort of thinking about, like, how do we perhaps get out of some of the echo chambers of here, which is great and safe and good, and we need the rally cry of that, but start talking to what people on the street actually think, and how do we use that to then build framing and campaigning on this.
Great. Thanks very much, Emma. Thanks very much. Any other comments? I did see another hand go up somewhere. Over there, Ralph. Thank you. Pardon me?
Is there a speaker for the group? Go on over here.
Yep.
Hi. I don't want us to end on a really tough note, but we talked a lot about a challenge. Can everyone really be included in a MIG? And we talked a lot about the amazing voluntary work and ideas and talent that we gain in society from asylum seekers, and how we really need to make sure that we can incorporate that into understanding what is needed by those groups, and are there creative ways, similar to support from SAAS and from bus passes, where people who it's not easy for the Scottish Government to incorporate into this can really be included. So I think we're all going to go away and think about that one. And we talked a little bit as well about the need for funding services to a decent standard, so that the costs don't then undermine the amazing work that a MIG could do. And Bridie was mentioning one of her fears being about housing and the ways in which the costs of housing have increased so significantly, and is one of the ways that we can make progress, also by always thinking about how progress in those areas can help to shore up the good that a MIG can be doing. So housing could lead to good jobs and green standards as a bonus.
Great, thank you, Becky. I think we'll maybe go to this table right at the front, and that will be our last bit of feedback. And then I'll ask Russell to give a wee bit of comment.
We were just speaking about the example you have said about being piloted with care experienced young people. I work with care experienced young people, and I previously I looked after an accommodated young person who 7 years is now I'm a social worker. So the way of having this piloted, I do think it would definitely work. There's pathways, assessments that need to get done with all care experienced young people through the social work departments, and that's under legislation. So I really think, and it goes through all the themes of finances, accommodation, and I do think that would really work. Really well, everyone working together, social work, benefits agencies, Poverty Alliance, like everyone working together, as well as care experienced young people being put into pilot groups that they already have that, they have the good communication with social work and with other service providers, that really that would be good relationships already there for everyone to work together and build on the pilot. I do think it would be a good thing, as well as asylum seeking young people. So some of them are care experienced young people, and it would be bringing in a lot of different themes that everyone could work together to get out to see what the analysis would actually be for going forward with other like groups of people being piloted as well.
Great, thank you. Russell, do you have any final reflections?
Yeah, I think I, just like Emma, in your contribution, it feels so different to this time last year, which is not down to me, expert group. I think that is absolutely down to you and the difference in context between this time last year and this year. it does feel like you can see a way through what is still an incredibly difficult, if not impossible, situation for some, but you can begin to see where we could go. And in terms of language, absolutely, this is not for 1 minute the version that needs to be the one that sells this, in inverted commas, to the general public. That, to me, is one of the things that, whether in this group or, as you said, beyond, we absolutely need to work on. And Peter is leading a work stream on that for the expert group. In terms of the equalities analysis and the intersectional dimensions of that, absolutely. So we have a good range of people on the expert group, but that's not enough. The analysis that we are looking at, the decisions that we are taking, and the lens that we put onto all of that needs to be right. So we're aware of that. I think we absolutely have ambitions to make sure we're doing as well as we possibly can on that. What I won't do is say that we're perfect or that we'll get to perfect by the end, but we're certainly aiming to be on that. In terms of services and a MIG for who, so I think, as ever in these things, is this for citizens? Is this for residents? Does this include prisoners, students? Does this include people either on NRPF, no recourse to public funds, or other routes in? I think the ambition around the table, it wouldn't be speaking out of class, is to make this for everybody genuinely in its ultimate form. But I think the steps towards that will be restricted by things that are beyond even the Scottish Government's control, as you heard this morning. If a public body pays beyond what is meant to somebody on no recourse to public funds, it's the person who suffers, and I think that's among the most pernicious parts of that very, very... I've said that word so often, but it's so applicable. And then in terms of the last point, I think that's really heartening to hear that, this is exactly the type of conversation we as an expert group need to get into. Like, how could you make this happen, and what are the links that are already in place that could make this easier? So really, really good to hear. Overall reflection is just, it's been such an amazingly important but incredibly useful day for me, and I think there's a whole bunch of the expert group here too. But that isn't the most important thing. The most important thing is whether it's led to ideas in you and action in you, and in the pledge cards in 6 months, whether there'll be things that we can all look upon that we've done between now and Easter to push this forward a bit. And I have no doubt after today that there's a whole bunch of action coming. So all I would say is massive thank you to all of you, and a massive thank you to Poverty Alliance too.
Thank you, Russell. And I guess you would think that Russell and I were coordinated in our final words here, but that's I guess what I wanted to say was what Russell has just said. At the start of this morning's event, I said that we would have an important discussion, and it really has been. I think our discussions today have reinforced for me just how important the minimum income guarantee is to fundamentally reimagining how our social security system can work, how our labour market can work to provide people with all that they need. And to go back to that phrase that I used earlier on, to making that demand for the right to an adequate standard of living more than just a slogan, something that we can actually turn into reality. And I think throughout our discussions today, we've covered a whole wide range of very difficult issues, some really tricky ones around how we might implement a minimum income guarantee. But at the heart of all of this is really a question of how do we use our resources. And we've had a lot of discussion. The Cabinet Secretary emphasised to us the limitations on our resources. But it's about decisions that we want to make as to how we use our resources, whether we design our services with people at the heart of them, whether we remake our social security with human rights at the heart of them, and how jobs in our economy are in service of our society rather than feeling we have a duty to our economy, as some people might see it. In our current context, some of our discussions today might seem overly optimistic and overly hopeful, but as I've said before at these events, probably at the conference last year, and I am quoting here, these aren't my words, to be truly radical is to make hope possible. And I think in that respect, the minimum income guarantee is a truly radical policy. It does make hope possible. And I think now the challenge for us, for all of us in this room today, is how we turn these discussions into practical ideas, how we make that hope practical. We've heard some of those ideas just now. I know that on your pledge cards there will be more. I'm trusting you that you've filled them in and that you'll post them. There's a little box, I think, outside, and you can post them there or leave them on the table. We'll get them. But I think whether we take forward those ideas, it's down to us. I think we in the Poverty Alliance are all impatient to see change and to move things at pace. So please be assured that over the months and years to come, the Poverty Alliance and all of us together will be working to put those ideas into action. So thank you again for all of your contributions today. Before you all go, a few final thank yous to all of our speakers throughout the day. There have been a fantastic range of speakers, so thank you all for the efforts that you put in. Thank you to all of the staff team at the Glasgow Royal Concert Hall. You have looked after us exceptionally well, as you always do, so thank you very much to the whole team. And a special thanks to the Poverty Alliance staff that have organised the event today, so Ruth and the policy team in particular, and Mel and the admin team also for making sure that everything went smoothly. And thank you to all of you for coming along today. If you're not a member of the Poverty Alliance, another thing that I say at the end of every event, if you're not a member of the Poverty Alliance, please consider joining. And we look forward to seeing you not next year, but much sooner than that, and to following up your pledge cards. Thanks very much, everyone. Safe home.